Hello, children. This is Grandma Carla with Chapter 4 of Freddy Goes Camping by Walter R. Brooks. And we start Chapter 4. News travels fast in the forest. By sundown, every deer and fox and coon, every squirrel and chipmunk within a radius of 20 miles knew that Mr. C. Jimson Camphor and his friend from the city were camping on Jones Bay, quarter of a mile below Lakeside. What they did not know, of course, was that the friend from the city was Freddy. They supposed him to be Dr. Henry Hopper. Freddy had realized that his identity must be carefully concealed. He knew that the minute they pulled the canoe up on the shore, dozens of curious eyes would be watching every move, and dozens of sharp ears listening to every word. And once the wood animals learned that the famous pig detective was camping beside the lake, it wouldn't be too long before the whole countryside knew it too. Fortunately, Mr. Camphor had a lot of old camping clothes packed away in mothballs, and from these Freddy picked out a lumberman's flannel shirt in big black and red checks, a pair of blue work pants, some red and white striped woolen socks, and some high-laced boots, which, though too large for his trotters, worked fairly well when he stuffed an extra pair of socks into them before putting them on. He had decided not to wear false whiskers, as they were sure to be troublesome when walking through the brush. But in order to conceal his face as much as possible, he selected an old-fashioned coonskin cap that had belonged to Mr. Camphor's grandfather, who had been a well-known trapper. It was pretty hot, but it came well down over his eyes and had a tail that hung down behind. In this outfit, Freddy was just a small, perspiring camper as you might meet on any Adirondack trail. Even the strong smell of mothballs was right in character. Among the camping things was a small leather case like a doctor's case, containing a first aid kit and a few simple remedies, which Mr. Camphor said his aunt had made him buy to take on his first camping trip. On the side was the manufacturer's name, Henry Hopper and Company. He scraped off the and Company and lettered MD in its place with ink. "I don't know why I never thought of disguising myself as a doctor before," said Freddy. "With a doctor's case in my hand, I could get in anywhere." Along the north shore of the lake, the woods came right down to the water, but on the east end of Jones Bay was Stony Point, and beside the point a short stretch of sandy beach. At the edge of this, Mr. Camphor pitched the tent. He picked out a level spot, cleared off the brush with his hatchet, and pounded down one or two hummocks to make it smooth, and then unrolled and spread out the tent, pegged down the 8 corners, and going inside, set up the center pole. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. In another half hour, they had unpacked the canoe, set up the table and chairs in front of the tent, and when Mr. Camphor had built a little fireplace of 2 rows of flat stones set about 4 inches apart, he filled a pail with water for the tea and began mixing batter for flapjacks. "Hadn't I better start the fire?" said Freddy. "You've never camped before, have you?" said Mr. Camphor. "Well, go ahead if you want to." So Freddy gathered a few handfuls of twigs and lit them between the stones. They were dry and flared up nicely. They flared up so nicely that in 2 minutes they were almost gone, and Freddy had to forage for more. This happened several times, and each time Freddy had to go farther and take longer to get another supply. And the last time the fire went out before he could get back. "Oh dear," he said. "I guess I ought to have collected plenty of wood first, hadn't I?" "Can you use a hatchet?" said Mr. Camphor. "There are some black birch saplings back of the tent. Cut 3 or 4 of the small ones and drag them around here. They'll burn green. Get plenty of twigs and sticks going, and then put your birch on. It'll burn down to coals, and we need coals to cook the flapjacks." He put down the bowl of batter and opened a package of bacon. "There's no point in camping if you're not going to be comfortable," he said. "And the secret to being comfortable is never doing anything until you're prepared. Never put up your tent until you've made the ground level. Never light your fire till you've gathered all the fuel you'll need. and he got out the plates and the knives and the forks and began to set the table. Freddy's second fire was more successful. He made it too large, as most beginners do. A tiny flame will heat a pail of water in a few minutes, and a few handfuls of coals will fry all the flapjacks a man and a pig can eat. They had butter and maple syrup on their flapjacks and took turns cooking them. Mr. Camphor showed Freddy how to flip them. He was an expert. When a flapjack was done on one side, he would give the frying pan a flip, and the flapjack would go up and make 3 complete turns in the air before landing back squarely in the pan, uncooked side down. Freddy's first one flew up into a tree and stayed there, and his second one was a success, though a sloppy one, for it hit the edge of the pan and half of it went off into the fire. After that, he did better. It was so much fun flipping them that he ate 16. After the 16th, Freddy groaned and stretched out lazily in his chair. "Oh, wee," he said, "this is the life." "Oh, wee yourself," said Mr. Camphor. "If you're through, you can wash the dishes." "What now?" said Freddy. "No good camper ever leaves dirty dishes around," said Mr. Camphor, and handed him the frying pan. Freddy went into the tent and rummaged in the pack. "Where's the dishpan?" he called. Mr. Camphor called him back. "There's your dishpan, my boy," he said, pointing to the lake. "A bunch of grass for a dish rag and a handful of sand for soap, and you'll be surprised how clean you can scour things." After everything was washed and put away, Mr. Camphor got out the telescope and set it on a tripod and peered through it across the lake. "Let's see what's going on at home," he said. "Ha! There's Bannister coming down to wheel Aunt Elmira into the house. Want to look?" Freddy put his eye to the glass. The distant shore seemed to leap up to within a few yards. There was Miss Elmira sitting in her chair so close that he could have seen the expression on her face, if there had been any, which of course there wasn't. Bannister stood in front of her. As Freddy watched, he went around behind the chair and started to wheel it toward the house. "Goodness," said Freddy, for the butler had bent down and made a hideous face at the old lady's back. "What is it?" said Mr. Camphor, and as Freddy moved aside and let him look, "Gracious me," he said, "I didn't know Bannister felt as strongly about her as that." And after a minute, "Why, he's remarkably talented. Ha! I wonder if I could do that one. How's this, Freddy?" He turned towards the pig and wrinkled up his nose and sort of pulled all of his other features close around it. "Not bad," said Freddy, "but look." He rolled his eyes up, stretched his mouth wide, and then twisted his snout to one side. "Heavens," said Mr. Camphor. "Stop it, Freddy. That's too awful. Why, you don't even look human." "Ha! Well, of course you don't anyway. But I mean, couldn't you injure your face doing that?" "We used to play a game," Freddy said. "Sit around and make faces, and the most horrible one got a prize." "You must show me your prizes sometime," Mr. Camphor said. "I'll bet you got a room full." He glanced at the sun, which was just touching the western hills. "Let's build up the fire. It will be chilly when the sun sets. We'll drag some of those dead branches down. Don't bother to chop them up. We'll put the butts in the fire and move them up as they burn. Oh, not that piece, Freddy. It's hemlock. Snaps and throws sparks all over the place." "Psst," Freddy whispered, for he had heard the rustle of some small animal in the underbrush. "Not so loud with the name. Remember who I am." "Sorry," muttered Mr. Camphor. He sat back down and poked at the fire with his stick. "Well, Dr. Hopper," he said in a loud voice, "you were going to tell me some of your experiences in the wilds of Africa, were you not?" "So I was, Mr. Camphor, sir, so I was," said Freddy pompously. "Well, sir, as you know, my purpose in going to Africa was to study the methods of the native witch doctors in curing disease. These methods are rather different from the regular American medical practice and include putting on false faces, dancing around the patient, and banging on drums and yelling. All this looks pretty silly to doctors who just give pills and look at your tongue. But the odd thing is that these patients often got on well. Successful in this treatment is, only a few American doctors use it. You can see why. If you, sir, came down with the flu, and your doctor, instead of taking your temperature and looking very solemn, were to dress up in a leopard skin and a clown mask and dance around your bed screeching and shaking a rattle, you might get sort of irritated. It was getting dark. Freddy glanced around. Here and there in the underbrush, sparks glowed steadily in pairs, the eyes of small animals reflecting in the firelight. It was the audience that always surrounds a campfire at night. However, Freddy went on, from medical treatment, I was led into the study of magic, which the witch doctors go in for a lot. Ha, magic, said Mr. Camphor. I have a friend who is a magician, Freddy. You may have heard of him. I have attended his performances, Freddy replied, a remarkably clever pig. However, as I was saying, I studied magic. I studied under Magumpus, and the most celebrated witch doctor in Africa. I became expert in the weaving of spells and the manufacture of wishing caps. You know, you put them on and then wish for whatever you want. And do you get your wish? Sometimes, and sometimes not, all depending on what? Oh, on general conditions, this and that. Very clear, said Mr. Camphor. From your description, I feel that I could almost make one myself. But continue. Later, said Freddy, I learned to work transformations. Take a man, for instance, and change him into a pig. That's where I got into trouble. I was practicing one day, and I changed old McGlimpy into a tree. Thought his name was McGlumpus, said Mr. Camphor. McGlimpy was his first name. Full name, McGlimpy McGlumpus. Anyway, there he was, 100-foot bongo tree, and I had forgotten how to change him back again. And of course he couldn't tell me. He could only just rustle. Boy, how he rustled. He was pretty mad. I left Africa in a hurry. Good thing I hadn't changed him into an elephant or a crocodile, wasn't it? What's that? Mr. Camphor exclaimed. He jumped up and listened. It sounded like a shot. Freddy had heard it too, but only faintly because the coonskin cap was so tight over his ears. Must be a long way off, he said. I don't think so, Mr. Camphor said. Sounds don't travel very far in the woods. It came from the direction of Lakeside. Let's go down and look. There's a trail along the shore. Here's a picture of all of the creatures in the woods. Remember, they have to keep his identity secret from all of the creatures in the woods. And here is a picture of Freddy flipping flapjacks, and it shows that the first one went up into the tree and stayed there. There's Freddy all dressed up in his checkered shirt and his pants. And that's the end of chapter 4. And this is Grandma Carla, and I love you.